Hello, and welcome to Varn Blog and the Rabble Report. And I'm here with the Rabble reporters, Joseph and Grant. We have a long history going back a while, and we haven't done anything collaboratively. God, probably since Emancipation's collapsed, like 6 years ago or whatever. So we're talking about. Well, we'll start off talking about Mamdani and move into our general recoalescing, because my framework has gotten closer and closer to anti-politics, even though I'm probably more interested in politics than I was in the past. But I no longer think that our ways of handling politics is possible through the conventional means. And you guys, this is what you do. So I wanted to ask you two, what do you make of yet another young political entrepreneur dethroning a establishment hack? And we have to remember that Eric Adams was such a person not even that long ago. So where you think we're at there?
Story of our time, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess the question is, why do you think he won? I think if you untangle that from, I don't know, all the, I guess all the weird reactions to this, whether the extremely celebratory or the outright apocalyptic.
Yeah.
Untangle that from, why did the average person vote for him?
Right. I mean, particularly when you look at the demographics who voted for them, why did the average person under 45 in almost every borough but Staten Island go for him on margin? I mean, yeah, there were more conventional Democrats with no primaries who did better on Tuesday night, but you know, the average person who's not a DSA member did not know who Mamdani was until what, like 3 months ago? Like,
probably once the primary, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it's a pretty spectacular rise in prominence, right?
Yeah, even for a New York City mayor, you know, like there's think pieces on Mamdani coming out of Europe. Yeah, I read one yesterday. You know, that did not happen for Eric Adams. So,
well,
what do we make of
it? This is one of the reasons we were sort of excited to come on here too, is that you know, obviously there is a difference between the passive Mamdani supporter or the person in New York City who voted for Mamdani with maybe reasonable expectations, somebody who's on, like, you know, a left-wing voter, that kind of thing, and that message of affordability that he was going for. And then you have also, you know, I think you said it the other day, you're the man who knows DSA better than DSA knows itself, Derek. And there is this activist layer that sees this as a springboard for themselves, right? And so I think we're going to get into why Mamdani won. I think we're going to get into some of the myths on both sides. Obviously, you have the right with what we've called Mamdani derangement syndrome, right? This kind of red terror reaction to his rise, as if, you know, Chairman Mao has just taken over New York City. But there's also in an inverted version of that on parts of the left as well that are seeing this as really their triumph and their movement. And I think the anti-political lens, which is sort of, you know, that decline of mass politics and the rise of this void in politics, it suggests maybe Mamdani is a smart political entrepreneur who was able to capitalize on an unraveling establishment. And maybe it's not their movement in terms of the DSA in a lot of ways. So, I think one thing we have to do, though, is I think we're going to end up sounding quite contrarian here, no matter what. But who are we being contrary to, right? I think, your average Mamdani voter probably had their reasons that we can get into as well. But from an anti-political perspective, we're definitely also interested in what is this faction that sees its future in this person, and how's that going to go? And if he had listened to them, would he have done as well as he did, really?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question for me because I am interested in the DSA. I am going to be more involved with them, but it's also an involvement out of almost anthropological interest. Because I've been challenging them on the scalability of any of their wins. And I've talked about how they've had to de-endorse electeds. I've talked about the fact that their union campaigns are sometimes regionally successful, but they don't translate to anything nationally. Like they don't move the national board at all. The net union density is still declining at the same rate than it has been. It doesn't matter how much people are salting Amazon and Starbucks. I mean, some of that is they don't seem to understand the scale of shops being so fundamentally different, which is not to say that people don't deserve unions. Of course they do. It's just that an Amazon warehouse would be a big win if you got it ever outside of New York. And but a Starbucks shop, that's what, between 15 and 30 people per shop, and each one of them has their own union, or the city has its own union depending on the local laws, and they can't even seem to get full contracts done after many years. So when I challenge a lot of the DSA people on this, I get, well, I mean, yesterday I got outright mass hostility. I mean, I did kind of troll them by comparing them to Moms for Liberty. But
that was a good troll, though. That Moms for Liberty is bigger than the DSA. I mean, how do you claim to be the real movement and you're smaller than Moms for Liberty? But
they're like, it's a sect cult that can't get anyone elected. And I'm like, well, they took over school boards until recently. They actually do have more to show in educational policy, which is what they seem to care about. They also screwed up their leverage totally. But arguably, the DSA kind of has too. And when I've said to other members of the DSA, like, okay, I'm with you. I want to be with you on this. I want to support you. I want you to be successful. But I have the question that I sincerely have is that almost everything you use, including some of your systems, are tied into the Democratic Party establishment. And that includes things like what happened with our revolution, which has created Middle Seat, which is now tied into David Hogg, the Leaders We Deserve, and whatnot, which is just another, apparatus to get people into PACs and to collect voter lists from these politicians and then sell them to other progressive voters. And their biggest campaign was John Featherman. And they're tied to Bernie. They come directly out of our revolution.
Groups people have never heard of that send you too many text messages.
Correct. So, I want to talk about this though, because you also have people like Omar Fatah open the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, and who kind of got wiped. So the DSA's agenda didn't translate downstream in that many places, at least on Tuesday night. And it's also interesting because there's a lot of talk about the transition team, and there's a lot of talk about Lena Khan, who is, I will admit, like one of my favorite people in some ways from the Biden administration. but is a sign of like this weird vestigial Walter Mondale kind of like coalition politics from the 70s that Biden was trying to kind of do that had been sort of suppressed by DNC and Obama. And people are taking this as an anti-establishment pick. And I'm like, she was literally in the cabinet of the last president.
Yeah, I mean the populism part of the left populism in Mamdani's campaign has diminished quite a bit since the primary victory over Cuomo. I mean, there was, in a way, some degree of populism and even anti-political charge, I think, was sort of thrust upon Mamdani by circumstance. When you're running against, Cuomo of all people, it's just a baseline reality that you are running against the Democratic Party's old guard unraveling and kind of the zombie leftovers of that. But yeah, I mean, it's looking, I don't know. Joe, what do you think here? Because there's also so much we can talk about in all of that. Like,
yeah,
PSA's strategy, right? Like even the questions of, does it work? Does it not work? It's like, what are they trying to achieve? What does that relate to what any of us here want to see happen? Like all of those, like there's so much to dig into here with all of that too. But Joe, I don't know if you had any thoughts.
Oh, you mean like what is DSA trying to achieve versus Mamdani? Or
I mean, that's one way to take it, but just
it's something I'd like to ask Derek. I think Derek would know more than I would.
Well, I don't know what Mamdani is trying to achieve. I will say he gave a more ideological speech than I was expecting. It made a lot of the DSA heartened, although the hardcore communists were still pissed because, like, even though he chose a Eugene Debs quote, he chose the most milquetoast Eugene Debs quote you could find. But the signals were picked up across the board. The other thing is, like, who's been weird about this and who hasn't? Like, we talked about the DSA here, okay, and the DSA is increasingly attached to Zoran. They're running a, you, us, we campaign with a big Z over it, but at the same token, Mamdani's municipal socialism is not that different from the progressive agenda of the 70s and 80s. It's not that it is different, but it's not that different from Bill de Blasio. And Bill de Blasio voted for and supported and endorsed Mamdani. And yet, even with the Trump apparatus throwing their weight on the scales for Cuomo, who, of course, immediately, as soon as he conceded, did the normal lie, left the left, as if he was ever on it. Think piece that they all do. The question becomes, like, why couldn't Hillary Clinton be reasonable about this? I mean, they didn't like Dennis Kucinich, they didn't like Mike Gravel, but they weren't trying to drum him out of the party in the late 90s and the aughts. Like, and they would not have risked throwing their weight behind an independent who was clearly bucking the primary system. And yet they tried to hedge their bets till the very last minute on this, which I think did make Mamdani more popular, frankly. And who was reasonable about that? It was like former neoconservatives like Tim Miller and Bill Kristol and the people at the Bulwark and the democracy, the former Republican democracy defenders industrial complex. Like,
yeah, I mean, Bill Kristol had a quote, and Bill Kristol, this is an arch neoconservative. He worked for George H.W. Bush's vice president, Dan Quayle. he had a quote that was something along the lines of, New York City gets to have a left-wing mayor. Which, I mean, if you compare that to how a lot of Republicans, and as you're getting at, centrist Democrats reacted to the initial Mamdani primary, though there are also these signs of conciliatory gestures from Mamdani towards this this part of the party. There's that contested rumor that he did something for Hakeem Jeffries, that like the
because there was going to be a challenger to Hakeem Jeffries. I think I don't know what's going on with that actually, but Mamdani was trying to pull strings to, or try to sort of conciliate and be like, hey, don't run against Jeffries.
That's the leader of the Democrats in the House right now.
Yeah.
Everybody forgets about that. He's not exactly Pelosi, but yeah, I do think that's kind of indicative, actually, because what happens, and we saw this with AOC as well. These ascendant like democratic socialists tend to try to integrate themselves into the party apparatus more than float above or against it, really.
Yeah, there's this combination with Mamdani of weird overreaction levels of hostility in some camps, and then also this kind of really well, wait, why aren't you pissing these people off if you're anything radical? On the other hand,
yeah, it's a tightrope. It's interesting to watch. I mean,
I think it's all factional politics.
Yeah,
because he's coming in. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think it's because there's something about Mamdani took everybody by surprise, right? I mean, that's sort of the disruptive aspect of him, really. I don't think the left even expected to get this far, really. And he doesn't really come out of the traditional left of the Democratic Party in New York.
No, he does not. I mean, to put it in another, a funny story that Bhaskar Sankara repeated is that Sankara turned him down as an intern for The Nation. Like, so, now that may be, them building a political myth. I don't know. But it came out of the horse's mouth there. But, actually, there's two events about the kind of factional politics of the Democratic Party that I think people miss, because a lot of people think that there's a big, like, DNC, I don't know, Hydra squid that runs everything. And to some degree, I don't think that's completely false, but it's kind of misleading, because a lot of the different factions of the centrist also hate each other. One of the things about politicians is I think people do not know how much they actually probably hate each other most of the time. And Obama's stance on this is interesting, and so was admittedly, it was one NYDSA person. I'm not saying they represent the vast opinions of the DSA, but it was one of the things that shocked me about the delusion levels of this. Like, I'm not sad about Mamdani won. I mean, like, fuck Andrew Cuomo, but that's why. Like,
yeah, that's that's why most of New York voted for him, really.
Right. I don't want sex past grandma killer. Allegedly, kind of, to be a mayor, but it's interesting because Barack Obama has made a couple of phone calls to Mamdani, and there's at least a small faction of the New York DSA that took this as Obama bending the knee to the DSA. And I literally laughed out loud.
Whatever you want to tell yourself, guys. Help you sleep at night.
Because I'm like, I think people only remember Obama as withered, we're beginning to turn against him, Obama. And it took a lot of people a long time to start talking fairly frankly about Obama. I mean, one of the things that one of the late friend of the show, Michael Brooks, and I gotten a tiff once when I said, like, look, I get that, like, you know, you think Obama's an imperfect politician, but you defend him, whereas I don't. But I have to remind myself that in 2008, my Mike Gravel canvassing ass fell for it. It's the only time in my adult life that I voted for a major party candidate for the executive. And I have to remind myself of that danger. And also, I talked about Our Revolution, but it was Obama's organization that set up the model of grassroots org, stays around to continue mobilization. Mobilization dies down, but guess what? Now you got a consulting firm. Like,
right. That's actually a good thing to ask ourselves about it. How are these? Because I think a big conceit of these campaigns actually is to. I think there's this idea that you will build a social movement out of taking public office, but it never quite works that way. And we've seen people attempt this before too, or presidential campaigns attempted as well. Because I think that was a conceit of Bernie Sanders actually, that that from the office he will mount like gigantic rallies and pressure campaigns that'll make Mitch McConnell fold or whatever. I think Mamdani's hinted at setting up something like this too, actually, while he's in office, or if it hasn't been set up already. But
right, you've got these political actors who don't have a mass social base, and I mean, maybe look, there's a little bit of a historical memory necessary here, like maybe they can turn out some big rallies or something like that, or within our kind of current context. But we're talking about, certain politicians were able to ram things through in the past because of their ability to mobilize like mass social groups in society on a scale that none of this even comes close to touching. And so and so there is like obviously a gridlock and a stagnancy. And so they make this kind of promise like, well, we'll build the social movement out of being in office. And that's how we're going to get past these kind of frozen barriers and that sort of thing.
Well, that was always my critique of St. Bernie, is that what I was being sold felt circular to me. Like, I need a workers' movement to put Bernie in power so he can change the situation so that the workers' movement he needs to exist to get elected would then exist. But he can't do that unless he's already not just elected, but has a strong contingency of the Democratic Party behind him enough to make policy and not be a lame duck president. And I was like, that's almost perfectly circular. And the other thing that I've said, and this is unfortunately the sign of a successful politics, particularly this day and age, but there's been all this talk of elite capture. Freddie DeBoer wrote a book about elite capture of the social justice movement. Afume Otaira wrote a book about elite capture of identity politics, which I think was a little bit more, a little bit too self-flattering about some of the nature of that. But I've been really noticing and talking about seeing more and more people on the train of Sandersism, as Sandersism is no longer as much of a socially viable project. And there's been a deliberate amnesia there. I mean, by amnesia, I'm not talking about amnesia from 2016. I'm talking about amnesia from last year. Like seeing Sanders as somehow opposed to Biden. He endorsed Biden early. The Sanders movement has been becoming more and more something that you see in editorial groups coming out of people who have been forced out of conventional media jobs, but have all the credentials of scholars and media people that you would expect in those jobs. people with, JDs from Harvard and with multiple academic books from Oxford University Press, and who were just normie Democrats not 4 years ago or not 2 years ago. And no one's like asking, can you control these people? Is there a social movement to stop the kind of shenanigans developing from this movement that it developed in the other movements or political things or whatever? I don't know if we can really call them movements, to be quite honest, that have existed in the past. And when you point this out, the response you get from people who are heavily politically invested is hostility. Like when you go, I want you to succeed, but quit saying you're a movement in a country of 320 million when you have 80,000 or 85,000, I think, at most, and that your 100,000 numbers was actually kind of trumped up and you never even totally hit it. And even if you look at a force multiplier of like times 4, that's still not a lot, which is interesting considering how much discourse it builds. And I think that's this weird sort of moment, because if you and I look at like what we see as political movements today, if you see something like mass politics, it's more, believe it or not, it was an EndNotes essay that I saw this in. They called it anti-movement movements or whatever. It was more anti-mass politics. Like you see attacks on the political concepts itself. And it's very hard to be pushing an agenda that is based on state capacity while you literally see that state capacity fall apart in front of your eyes, undeniably.
Actually, I want to, Derek, can you explain more on what you were saying before? Actually, on your last, sorry, on it was what you were saying before. You were talking about state capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Anti-movement movements.
The anti-movement movements of state capacity. So anti-movement movements are things like what we've seen, things that are organic, that are not like, I don't know, no King's rallies with Walmart heiresses helping get the money, with very limited time frames and all that. Yes, they're huge. Yes, they're all over the nation. They are also mostly over 40. I've been to a few of them to observe, but they do, we're not even talking about like millennials here. I saw a lot of Gen Xers, and a lot of even boomers. Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying it's a very different thing than the instances that you saw spark the two BLMs. Now, I in 2014, I said the Black Lives Matter was going to be captured by fairly elite college activists and funneled into Democratic Party concerns. And it didn't happen once, it happened twice. And it happened the second time so blindingly quickly that it was kind of astounding. It almost like erased prior history of like racial integration movements. And it came to this point where you had these things in the street, and I had people, I remember talking to AM Gitlitz from the formerly known as Antifada, and now this wreckage. And he's like, we're going to have riots like this in the beginning of the Biden administration. I'm like, no, you're not. You're not. You're not going to do that. And the reason why you're not going to do it is because this politics has already been recuperated. Totally recuperated. And frankly, it went through the anti-movement movement to establishment thing to grift. And I don't throw grift around, incredibly quickly after Floyd. I mean, you did make a few millionaires out of that movement, and you created some corporate DI policies while at the time, right? They were focused on things like college enrollment. poor Black college enrollment dropped after DEI programs were really pushed and universities, so that language was pushed. What replaced it was more fairly elite international school students. Economic diversity dropped so very quickly. So it was very clear to a lot of people that what they were promised as the political manifestation of this anger that erupted in these kind of anti-political movements was redirected towards a fairly elite shell game immediately and thoroughly, which is why when people were surprised, like, oh, why did so many Latinos and so many Black men turn tail and vote for Trump? And I was like, are you stupid? They didn't benefit from the last couple of years. You said one thing, you did another, and you're surprised that people don't trust you. I mean, yeah, a lot of people are having buyer's remorse with Trump in those communities. Absolutely, the polls back that up. But that's just people reacting to the negative capacities of a failing political state. It doesn't seem like it can do anything for anybody except, if you look at the big, beautiful bill, for example, I mean, that just seems like a cash grab, just like a looting of public resources. So why are people going to trust that? Right? Like, and then why are you basing your whole project on just trying to get the executive control of those public resources? And, now at a municipal level where there's even bigger limits to it possibly being successful, like the municipal bond market.
Yeah, that's actually a good point too. Actually, there's a lot to chew on with that one. What do you think, Grant?
Oh, I'm thinking about the executive stuff, right? Like, it's a little bit afield, but when you mention this like constant obsession with contesting the executive, and it is weird, like people who are claim to be on the radical left, which also radical left is like a thing people used to self-identify as, but recently Joe said radical left, and somebody thought he was a Trumper because he said radical left. I think he's used the phrase so many times now that it's just like you hear it in his voice, I guess. But that was something people used to call themselves. I don't know. But what was I saying? Yeah, the emphasis by Democrats, by everybody talking about, rising fascism and that kind of thing on the executive. Well, the thing is, they don't actually propose anything to limit executive power, because as soon as they get their party into office, what do they need? The unitary executive. What does Biden do? Sign a bunch of executive orders. What would Sanders have had to do? Sign a bunch of executive orders. I mean, a little afield of what you were saying, but it's just something that that came to mind about like this whole thing about you have these political groups, whether it's in the Democrats, whether it's in the self-professed far left, who want to basically engineer a social movement. And I mean, I don't want to throw it back into too much history here, but when you think about the 19th century workers' movement, it's a little back to front to say that socialists created that. I mean, when you think about what socialist intellectuals did in that scenario, is they observed what was going on in society and clarified it. But these actually mass movements were not conjured out of like political voluntarism. And when you look to, like you were saying, at sort of more of the things that I guess people would call spontaneous or whatever. I mean, probably the left that I knew would call it spontaneous as a slur, but because they weren't in charge of it. But I think mostly when I think of anti-political movements, I actually think more of the Yellow Vests. And I think of 15M in Spain before it became Podemos, which, Podemos is left populism much more ambitiously, really, than Zoran Mamdani. And that's one of the things, too. Mamdani I mean, a lot of the things we're saying about there not being a movement, maybe DSAers would say, well, we just elected Mamdani. Why would at this moment you say there's not a movement? But we just did an episode on our show with our friend Tad about the declining horizons of left populism through the 2010s. I mean, it starts at Syriza, and that's kind of the high point. I mean, it doesn't really, or Podemos, right?
Yeah, Podemos and Syriza, and then Corbyn and Labor, which is already a waning.
Right, and Corbyn is even vaguely in terms of populism, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's definitely political entrepreneurship taking advantage of the void and the political establishment unraveling. But it's and then Sanders 2016, right, has a much more anti-political dimension than Sanders 2020, right? Sanders 2020 is like this factional figure within the Democratic Party by that point. So I mean, I don't know, I know I'm a little scattershot here, right? But we're bringing up so many different topics that, let me focus me on particular.
I guess too, though, when you think about it as a movement, class isn't really a clear indicator in terms of voting for this election.
It's empirically, it's just not for them to claim the workers' movement put Mamdani into office. I mean, he had a very grandiose speech where, like you said, he's quoting Eugene Debs, but Eugene Debs earned those words working for a workers' movement that Eugene Debs didn't see himself as the leader of that workers' movement either. And
not initially, anyway. Yeah. Go ahead.
It's that transformational, grandiose tone that the Mamdani victory speech had. I mean, but Joe, please go on.
Well, I mean, I guess that is kind of self-evident, though. I mean, what I will say is, you got an extremely high turnout for a New York mayoral race.
And it's I would even say it's to his advantage of him as a retail politician and figure that he had so much opposition because this, Cuomo lost with a higher vote count than the last three winners of the New York mayoral election. Seriously. And I do think part of it's Cuomo hatred, but part of it is Mamdani able to channel that Cuomo hatred into something, and then send the voters out. Now, on who supported Mamdani, the largest supporting group in percentages, I think, was Black men as far as per capita, but the largest absolute numbers is white women. And the biggest two dividers was wealth, not income, which ties to age, not role of production. And I'll tell you one of the things that I've been furious with the DSA is the DSA is very scattershot on what it calls class in a similar way to the way right-wing populists who are clearly trying to take advantage of you are scattershot on the way they call class. So, oyster farmers from Maine who own their own business and come from elite school backgrounds and have not had a wage earning job outside of the military, all of a sudden are being framed in Jacobin magazine as working class. And the people critiquing said oyster farmer for a stupid tattoo and signs of fecklessness as PMC. There's no evidence that ties that those things have anything to do about what's going on in Maine. And if anything, it seemed like there was a coordinated last-ditch effort to get volunteers and money into the Maine senatorial election by both sides, because this is not really the normal thing that would make the national news. Whereas Mamdani is a different figure than that, but how long can he stay that way? There's two real limitations to ask yourself. One, people are asking me what I mean by bonds. There are two ways that a city can raise revenue. Cities do not have currency sovereignty. They cannot print money themselves out of a financial problem. They are necessarily limited to revenues that they take in from two things: municipal bonds, which is debt, and taxes. Who owns most municipal bonds? Businesses. All right. Almost every progressive mayor I can think of after the 1950s has met a hard wall on funding from the municipal bond market or from capital flight from taxation. And New York is already a high tax market. Mamdani probably knows he can't raise that many taxes there. Good luck trying to get any kind of city council or legislator to support some kind of, I mean, he would need legislative help to get this money anyway from upstate. But
yeah, you know,
everyone compares him to LaGuardia, but we can talk about LaGuardia because LaGuardia had Big Daddy FDR bucks.
Right. And it's interesting too, because I've seen like people complain about or not complain about this actually, but in the New York Times, there was a recent article about how he won, and it talks about him even sort of modulating his pitch towards skittish business leaders by saying he'll look for other revenue funds other than the tax hike. But when I mentioned this to some pro Mamdani people, I know it's odd the reaction where just like, no, he just said that once. He would never actually do that. He's a very committed socialist, and I found that was actually a very odd assertion to me too, actually, because it's very obvious that Mamdani had to step away from being a left ideologue to get as far as he has.
Right. He's had to not be who he was, 5 years ago or even earlier, which, I mean, I'm not even, to me, I actually direct more criticism or skepticism or however. I mean, I try to remain analytically neutral, but, I'm really, a lot of the cynicism is in the supporters who try to have their cake and eat it too, with him being like a radical. I think he ran a clever campaign and did what he had to do to win it. And, probably if he listened to certain people on the left more, he would have had a harder time winning. But, Joe, I think you were also going to bring up like past New York City. I know both of you have been thinking lately about past New York City mayors. From Derek has brought up Dinkins, and then Joe, you've brought up LaGuardia, right? Like the federal funding element of this. If you want to explain your thoughts on that.
Well,
especially with Trump as the context, right?
Right. Well, LaGuardia, who was basically the mayor under the New Deal, he ran into serious problems like in his last term because, funding dried up because of the war. But it's not that he didn't accomplish a lot as mayor, but it relied very heavily on having a close ally as president. You can see the problems now with Mamdani, actually, when you think of it that way, because who is president?
Right. And it's like he's sort of, if he runs it, he's in kind of a catch-22, because if he runs into problems in terms of being able to accomplish things for affordability in New York, then how do you maintain authority in the current Democratic Party? Is fight Trump, right? But if you're fighting Trump, how does that affect your ability to work on affordability in New York City?
Right. Well, here's the thing too, though. Can he avoid fighting Trump?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Trump actually said some things of, maybe we'll be nice to him, maybe we'll work with him, kind of thing. I mean, we'll see. Yeah, but
right. I mean, the thing too, though, is it's not just that, because I could buy Trump, wouldn't want to destroy New York if he didn't have to, but I could buy he has like a sort of like
sentimental attachment.
I mean, it's
his image. City. Yeah, it's his city. He's probably territorial over it. That's probably what it is. Yeah. But I think the problem is that can Mamdani really afford being conciliatory at all?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, how would not just the DSA, but even how would normie Democrats react to that? The other thing is, if you look at Brandon Johnson, not before the DSAers come at me, my fellow DSAers, I guess, not part of The DSA wasn't endorsed by the DSA, but very much tried to run off that image after Lori Lightfoot came in with a sweep with the progressives singing his praises. And within a year, less popular than the worst period of Lori Lightfoot. Variety of reasons for that, but I mean, a big one is he can't deliver. He can't deliver because he doesn't have the city council on his side. The bond market's going to say no. He can't really tax it out. What is he going to do? But the one thing that has raised both his popularity locally and his profile is ICE attacking Chicago. Like,
yeah, I mean, there's that question of do Mamdani and Trump kind of work together as natural foils? You know, like is that actually politically convenient to both of them? I don't have an answer to that, but
I think it would have to be really. I can't avoid. Actually, yeah, no, I don't know how you could avoid doing this.
I mean, if we look at Mark Carney in Canada, he's getting tons of pushback from the progressives and the Liberal coalition already, because having to make realpolitik concessions to Trump because, you know, there's literal economic limits to Canadian nationalism. And people have said that Carney's a disaster now. And I've been like, but what did you expect? Like you were unhappy with the party. Trump attacked him. It brought up Canadian nationalism, whose primary distinguishing factor is not the U.S. Like literally, if you want, like even Canadian right wingers, they have fantasies about when we're going to go take their water and how they're going to stand bravely against us. Like, I know I'm for part of my life as a dual citizen. I heard this in the 90s. The point I'm making is that only works for so long, but it does inject you with a temporary, brief, like heroic stature that you just like promising on affordability in most cities. Well, you know,
and some of these go ahead.
Fails. Go ahead. No, it just fails. Go ahead.
Some of these things also aren't really contradictions if you're just a person in New York City who voted for Mamdani to say, I don't like the Democratic establishment. I don't like Cuomo. I hope he makes rent cheaper. But as far as a lot of, you know, the left activist layer, you know, they have an ideological investment in him. They have a factional politics investment in him. There's things they want to get for themselves as an aspirational political class, you know, but it's supposed to be a socialist political class, right? So they can't make up their minds about whether they want to run the capitalist state, right? And so they're going to, and they keep trying to do it. And then there's a lot of problems that come up when you try to do that, or compromises you have to make, or those sorts of things. So it's sort of, and especially too, Derek, I think you were getting at this earlier, we're living in such a era of hostility to politics and such an era of like mistrust of the state and institutions that it's quite a ship to tie yourself to as well.
All right. The thing is that people right now, I mean, even today, what are we getting right now is like, we're watching the priorly super injected, all powerful steam world. We have the authority of the state. Conservatives already start to flake out over what, like getting their ass handed to them in a counter-systemic off year election season, where also the observational and objective facts right now is that the trends in the country actually favor freaky candidates and liberals on off-year elections, a reverse of the 20th century and the first decade of the 21st. But seems to be the new normal now because of, one, baby boomers dying. They're just getting fucking old, people. And two, the weird politics around education. And this is also something that maddens me because people talk about like the educating PMC, but then you're like, well, yeah, but if you're talking about anyone under 45 or over 25, it's 45% of the population. Now, if you go up or down, it was easier to achieve wealth without high levels of formal education up. And I mean, there was a brief influx of wealth into Zoomers about 3 years ago compared to millennials, but that's already over and they'll probably never own anything ever. But also they're a tiny generation. So it's these political dynamics don't map on to what people are trying to say they map on to. This was also true with Corbyn. I remember pointing out with Corbyn in ways that really made people upset when I said, look, there is a tie to wealth, but the most predictive thing about whether or not you are a Corbyn supporter in Labor or a Corbyn supporter in the general, when they tried to take the government and failed with more support than Keir Starmer took it with, is age. Age was the number one predictor, and then whether or not you lived in the area around London. So it was a metropole youth phenomenon, and by youth we mean people under 45 because like people live a lot longer now, but it's what it is. We're not talking about people under 25 because they don't turn out to vote in mass amounts, although they turn out more than in the past. So
that's interesting,
I find
though,
this,
isn't
it? Huh?
Well, I mean, why did that happen? Is my question, because
well, I mean, there's no with Labor. New Labor did come out of the fact that, I mean, even the British unions, which are more powerful than ours, but have been losing power for a long time. And the EU is unpopular, and Corbyn would not take a clear stance one way or the other in his relationship to Brexit, because theoretically, before he became leader of Labour, he was a left-wing Eurosceptic. But how do you run a party that is explicitly Remainder with that politics? You kind of split the baby constantly and piss everybody off. But yeah, I mean, we're going back into old Corbynism. I mean, people in the American left make a big deal. I mean, Chomsky's like, it was conspiracy, and there was false accusations of anti-Semitism, and I'm like, yeah, but that was always going to happen. Like, but it wasn't really a conspiracy. Like, that's not, like, there was a real frustration with what Labor was not doing. And the only reason Labor won under Keir Starmer is people got fucking pissed off at the conservatives. Like, if that's why Keir Starmer won, was able to establish a government with less support than when Corbyn lost with. But anyway.
Well, that does also show when they have these kind of, well, whether it's kind of an astroturfed feeling, no King's protest that technically has massive numbers on paper, or you have, these movements, I'll put movements in quote, that orient around electing somebody, and then they're going to use the bully pulpit, to create a bigger socialist movement. Well, Corbyn injected all these people into the Labour Party. What did it amount to? It wasn't enough.
Right. I mean, go back to Podemos and Syriza and left populism. In environments where parliamentary systems are more favorable than anything in the United States, with histories of stronger lefts than we have, that won full, complete governments and crashed and burned. I mean, yes, you have Yanis Varoufakis talking about the great betrayal of Syriza, but the thing is, would they have been able to actually build up an industrial capacity fast enough to float their own currency as a smallish state that could be strategically shut out of trade with parts of the EU? Now, there are a lot of people who still say, well, the austerity imposed under the Troika was so bad after they'd made that threat that they should have just gone ahead and done it. And I might even agree with them. But the thing is, that means there was no way for them to win. Because they would have paid for also, I mean, like if they had gone out and they were still as poor, they would have also paid for it. And these are not, you can't build industrial bases in countries overnight. Like, you know, for the Trumpists who actually, if they believed any of the bullshit out of his mouth, should be learning that right now.
I see somebody, do you mind if I jump into a comment that I see from the live stream? I think somebody said, I don't know. I think there's an opening right now for something. People are more mad than they've been in my lifetime. Just my opinion. I'm not sure if that's referencing, because I've been in the conversation, so I haven't been able to follow the comments or what have you. Maybe that's part of a larger conversation.
I don't think people are mad.
We agree. Assuming that's a response to the things we're saying, right? Like I wouldn't disagree that that there are openings, right? That the decline of mass politics, this opening up of the void, that there have been these kind of openings. I think if you think about it politically, there's interesting questions about, okay, so why has right-wing populism been more successful than left-wing populism in terms of exploiting some of these, in terms of political entrepreneurs, right? Why has that been more successful in general? But I also think, right, like when people think about opportunities, I think oftentimes they're thinking about it in a very old way, like wanting to bring the 20th century or even the 19th century and how that all looked back from that. But like, to go back to an earlier point I started making about what's going on right now, what era are we actually living through, right? We're seeing the end of the kind of political party cartels of the post-World War II political order. We're seeing the rise, really the return of anti-politics. And what does that open up in the future? I think probably some pretty interesting things potentially. But if your reaction is just this kind of rabid political opportunism to try and claw something like the old politics back, I don't think that's comes from studying society or how capitalism's contradictions are coming out right now. I think that's I think that like stuff like what left populism even is trying to do is entrepreneurial. I think a lot of the far left is more interested in representing the working class than the self-representation of the working class. And I'm not even sure that this stuff today looks like the 19th century workers movement when it does come back, right? That's the thing too. It'll like the people with the actual agency over history in that sense are going to be the ones who choose what it looks like.
Right.
I mean, and we have to make decisions about, do we stand with it? I think that's more.
So there's a couple of things that we have to deal with. One, when it comes to regulations, there's actually less regulations for things coming out of, like, I don't mean like health regulations, environmental regulations, but like just the amount of foresight to, like, I don't know, work with the government and do a business at the state level in China than the United States or Europe. Like, so a nominally communist country has less business regulations than we do, even though they have more control over those businesses. The other thing that I think about when we talk about this is, my friends, most people who are proletarians, i.e. wage earners, aren't in productive roles because they've been largely automated. I talk a lot about this, but the organic capacity of capital is very high right now, meaning there's a ton of fixed capital. And I'm going to speak now in normal terms. There's a lot of tech. That means you need less people to make money to do a job. Now that lowers profit rates, but you can still get high revenues from it. And that means that the power of the workers, like, someone was telling me, let's all go on general strike. I'm like, okay, you general strike at every retail place across the country, would it bring down U.S. capital? No, because 90% of even consumer spending right now is in the top 10% bracket of income. Like, you are not relevant to the majority of capital, either in production or in consumption. We've never existed under those conditions before. We have no idea what it means or if it's even sustainable. I don't know that it is, but that is where we are right now. So, you know, these myths, and I think the general strike was mythic anyway. I know people get mad when I say this, but like, general strikes have never been what they've said they were going to be. And they're almost never actually general strikes either. But beyond all that,
I mean, I guess we could talk about Weimar, but that's such a rabbit hole. I won't go there.
Right. I mean, beyond all that, then you also have the fact that these institutions are fragmented and piecemeal. They're public-private. They're easily corruptible. They're easy to get people into bureaucratic niches and squeeze. And the general public knows that. And then the third thing is that you have to address is, like, you guys can tell me all the time that like we win, we get people elected. But if you ask people that I live with in Utah, all right, why they don't trust politicians or why they vote right wing, I have gotten people just told me flat out, oh, we like a lot of the progressive stuff, but they never do it. So I just don't trust them. And my church likes this guy, so why not vote that way? Or this will help my local business, so why not vote that way? Or I don't vote. You know, and what we've seen is we've had more and more voter mobilization. I mean, like people complain about, oh, so many people in the US don't vote. More people vote now than they've ever voted. And it doesn't look the way people have assumed it was going to look. I mean, it still slightly favors Democrats, but like there is this assumption that it would favor Democrats overwhelmingly
and eternally.
And yeah, and forever. And it's just not
party
true.
Of government forever, all of that. Yeah. Well, and it reminds me too, right? Like, okay, unions poll pretty well, right? Still, but do people see them as a vehicle for their interests anymore in practice? Or do they kind of assume that it's going to be a cluster if they actually like try and do union activism at their workplace? And do they like, I think a lot of these things, and you talked about a ton of economic complexity that people face right now. I think, and maybe this is a little, you know, our show is about anti-politics and society, right? I tend to think that anti-politics is the way that the contradictions of capitalism are being expressed in our era. In terms of like an actual antagonism, at least. Not to say there's nothing going on economically ever, but we are in a period of social quiet in that sense, right? Which doesn't mean, listen, nothing in history lasts forever, too. I think people get very narrow about like projecting the time they're living in onto kind of forever. But I do think whatever happens economically, I think anti-politics is sort of a feature of modern capitalism rather than something that's just like populism, for example, right? Anti-politics can express itself technocratically. It can express itself through these kind of social movements. There's all sorts of ways that this kind of all bubbles up and is manifest. So
yeah, that's a good point too, Grant. Because to mention that social movements now that do happen tend to be expressed anti-politically, but I think this also might get at even why the labor movement fell into trouble ultimately.
How do you think? I mean, I have a suspicion of where you're going, but
you said that, like, you know, social movements now, they tend to be expressed anti-politically. We mentioned 15M, we mentioned the Yellow Vests. Those are good examples. But does this have anything to do with why you don't have workers spontaneously organizing into unions anymore?
Oh, or when they do their new unions, completely not currently existing ones, are there unions in other areas going into areas that they don't sectionally normally represent, like the UAW being desperate enough to go into TAs?
Right.
Like
Huge emphasis on public sector unions as well on the left.
right.
Which isn't to say abandon those workers or anything, but I think the sense classically was that private sector unions were the bulk of things.
Yeah, no, what we've seen since the 70s is the public sector unions have stayed steady for a variety of reasons, including that they're weirdly more industrially like structured because they're in large institutions with large institutional capacity. So you get lots of people very quickly. Although that is kind of changing. But it leads to like this awkward thing that, like, for example, the two largest unions in the UAW, not in the UAW, in the AFL-CIO, are the two teachers unions and then police unions, which leftists have no idea what to do with, because there's no way the AFL-CIO is going to kick them out, since they're like the third largest sector and they're larger than probably all the private sector unions to put together.
There's an interesting comment. Sorry. Anecdotally, people not in unions are as distrustful as unions as they are politicians.
I would say one of the interesting things I can tell you is people like the idea of unions right now, but they still don't trust joining them.
Yeah, actually, I know that labor union leaders tend to poll pretty low. Not as low as politicians, but I'm thinking it's like mid-20s in terms of being seen as trustworthy by the public. Not great numbers.
I would also say that's true. That's probably particularly true actually in the union. Like, we don't like our leadership by and large. Like, I always talk to DSAers about this. Like, I've talked to them, like, you guys always go, like, take McAlevey, and you take McAlevey to think that if you go into staffers and the staffers operate as this lever between politicians and the unions, that you're like this big power broker. And you might be, kinda, but the thing is, the rank and file eventually starts to hate you because you make more and more compromises with local politicians to do that. And you don't all, and by the way, staffing is the least democratic part of a union, right? Like, I can't tell in my union, there are these things called Uniserv. They both are, there are legal protection, but they're also like our lobbyists, right? Guess what? I have no control over as a rep. I'm a rep. I'm not even a rank and file member. I mean, I am a rank and file member, but I'm not just a rank and file member. I can't do anything. I have no say in who the Uniserv is. They're not presented to us. They're presented to like elected leadership who supposedly represent us, but we have to beg to get anyone to run for elected leadership. No one wants to do it. I tried to take a step back for a year as a rep and just say, I don't want to run this year. And my people begged me to do it. Like, they wouldn't let me quit. So I mean, I could, but I'd have to be like, okay, well then, well, we might not have it, like my local part of my school district might not have any representation if I don't do it. And I say that because I know how the unions work, right? Like, I'm in them. I work with organizations to coordinate between unions through worker centers. Like, I know a lot of people think I'm just a blowhard armchair on the internet, but like, I do a lot of this stuff. And it's amazing how much the union is. And also, there's structural problems with the union. They're not super democratic, even though they try to be. I mean, they're just like, my union does try to be. We vote on stuff, but there's all these capture points. There's the fact that certain, just because the way we're structured, elementary school teachers are overrepresented over high school teachers because they're smaller shops, but they get more reps. So high school teachers get pissed off about that. There's 1,000 things about actually dealing with the union that, like, if you go to Jacobin magazine, they're never going to say anything about it ever. And a lot of them are, a lot of them are in unions. They're in like the Writers Guild or the Teachers Union for colleges. You know what they do? They pay their dues.
I mean, and first off, I should mention I borrowed that point I made about public-private sector unions. I took that pretty directly from the guest on our last Rabble Report episode. But broader point about unions too that I think Joe was getting at, and that what you're saying is kind of reinforcing. I think they're seen as managerial parts of capitalism, and I'm not saying that everybody in them is like, I'm not saying that everybody's going, I'm not joining a union because it's a managerial part of capitalism, but
no, they're not thinking about that.
I'm not saying that's like a conscious thought, but they are very baked into politics, and there is in some cases almost an HR like quality. I mean, it's better than that, but there is an HR like quality, but especially the way the big unions are now sort of so politically integrated, and we're often, it's just a...
Why was the head of the AFT going to Ukraine during the Biden administration?
Right. They're kind of just political figures now, which was not really... Yeah, Joe, was that something you were kind of...
Yeah, I think that completely nails it down, actually.
Right. And when I see Bhaskar Sankara telling me that we should hope Sean Fain runs for president of the United States. I'm like, I don't need Sean Fain to run for president of the United States. I need Sean Fain to grow the fucking UAW, which is in a field that's declining. So he should really figure out how to get into other areas of the auto industry and start figuring out how to fight union battles in franchise markets. That's really hard to do. So they haven't pursued that. Right. Like when you see what the UAW has pursued outside of the major auto industries is like not anything related to this. And the other thing it means is now that these unions aren't representing like clear sections of industry anymore, there's jurisdictional battles all the damn time. So the unions are also poaching from each other. Is the UAW or the government workers going to try to represent the TAs? Because technically speaking, if you're at a public school, the TA is technically a government worker. In fact, in some of these areas, you have people doing pre-majority union to try to build unions up, to like get union membership, but you have different people working for different groups competing with each other. We've also had like the AFT has tried to raid NEA, UEA post out here during COVID, and stuff like that. And then it led to some of the UEA leadership doing things that I don't want to talk about. I don't want to slag on my own union, but like that hurt union members to stop that raid. And it led to membership decline. We actually, during the beginning of COVID, we saw a massive increase in people wanting to join the union. And by the end, we had actually gone down numbers. The only thing that has to talk about the anti-political mood, why we're doing good right now? They tried to ban collective bargaining in Utah. And now like people are interested in joining again. And so that's the dynamics here. And I don't see people talking about it honestly. And if you base stuff off New York, where unions are like part of the city infrastructure governance, it's a completely different dynamic than other places. And not always one that's loved. I mean, look, if I was like a carpenter or something in a heavy industry, I'd much rather be in New York than Utah. I tell you that. But at the same time, it's not like people necessarily love the union leadership. When people come out and say, well, it was Ronald Reagan who convinced everyone to hate the unions, the stats don't back that up. In fact, if you go back and read stuff from the Atari Democrats like Bill Bradley in the 1970s and 80s, they were actually talking about like how union leadership was getting paid out of stock dividends and stuff, and why that was going to lead them to be able to get people to go around the unions as a power broker in the Democratic Party and not be concerned with them anymore. Like, that wasn't coming from Reagan. That was coming from people studying what was going on in the unions themselves as the Mondale coalition started to die. And there's just not been an honest reckoning with this outside of people who really know the union movement. And there are people in the union movement who are really talking about this. They talk about the problems with business unions, et cetera, et cetera. But then again, it's like, okay, you talk about business unions, you're the CPUSA or the IWW, right? What victories have you had? Like, that's the other thing is people go, okay, well, at least these guys can give me insurance. You can't even do that. What do you got? Burger World and some prison unions? That's great. You're actually doing something which you didn't do from like the 1970s to the 1990s, but like your track record isn't so good. And it's very small. It doesn't scale up. And so, you know, people say I'm just blackpilling them, but I'm like, if you don't know this stuff, how can you possibly want to revive it? And that's why I think a lot of this stuff does come down into pure anti-politics, because people are mad and they don't want to take it anymore. And it leads to a very volatile politics. But the people who like put a lot of weight on left populism, you want to get sad, go back and read Mark Fisher talking about Syriza in 2014 and 2015. Like, it is depressing. Like, he's literally like talking about Syriza is like the possibility of joy. And you're just like, oh my
That's
God.
like the Harris campaign, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I actually pointed out the Harris campaign really did sound a lot like these left populists in the Corbyn coalition talking about things in 2014, 2015.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned too blackpilling and doomerism and like the ineffectiveness of the kind of old forms, right? I think anti-politics is kind of what saved me from being blackpilled in a way a lot of the leftists I was, used to speak with. Like, it's interesting because I actually probably ended up with more optimism in kind of a long-term socialist kind of, or at least Marx.
You don't hate people.
Yeah, and so and like
really hate to put it that simple, but it is that
the antisocial element of the left. Yeah, that was, I didn't really vibe with that, for lack of a better word, but I think because of anti-politics, it's like, it's not just about liking people too. It's like, I think there was a sense, what Marx called the real movement, right? Mm-hmm. Like, the like basically everybody I used to talk to, when I was more involved in the socialist left was kind of on this, like, the real movement is dead. Everything's over. Nothing is happening. What do we do? Type of black pill doomerism type of thing. And I'm like, well, actually, guys, if you like look at what's going on, there are things happening in society that you can extrapolate from, right? And they might not be the most convenient for building your pet political project, right? But that maybe that should, you could think about that and think about your role in the world and what is actually the role of a socialist intellectual anyway, and that kind of thing. I mean, I don't find these things blackpilling. I mean, look, I'd rather probably, if I worked in one of these industries, I'd rather be in a union than not. And I don't disparage, the cost. Like, I mean, I wouldn't downplay the cost of living crisis, for example, but really the cost of living crisis, I mean, that's been one of the few economic issues that has had salience recently in electorally. And it's because people with an anti-political bend can, like, anti-politicians can basically use it to portray the establishment in a certain way, right? Like, right. The establishment, it's a wrecking ball against their incompetence and their alienation and that kind of thing. It's not always talked about purely in this way of like, solely economic as an issue. It's often actually tied to kind of the predominant theme of our age, this political class element. I don't know, Joe. Does that mirror your experience at all, or?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense, and I think like the Mamdani campaign at its best tied the two together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why the primary, one of the reasons the primary went so well, and I think one of the reasons he did get the freak out that he did, to the extent he did get Mamdani derangement syndrome, and I think the pathologization of the public that the Republicans were doing about Mamdani voters actually mirrored. It was almost their version of, deplorables and that kind of thing that liberals were doing 10 years ago.
Mutually constitutive negative feedback or positive feedback loop, if I'm actually being scientifically correct, but about negative imagery. And this point that you guys make, one of the things that worry me when people get super into politics, particularly when they get, I've had people tell me they get into politics because they want hope and they want community. And I'm like, oh God, this is like the worst reason to ever touch anything political. You will, because people will betray you and it'll hurt.
I get scared when I hear people talk about community now.
But one of the things that I've told people is like, until people politicize things in a certain way, I generally think the public was going in ways that progressives more or less liked.
Yeah, I mean, we used to have an idea for an article that was basically called "Is the Public Fascist?" or "Is the Public Reactionary?" or something like that. Like in the height of Trump term 1, we were thinking about this. And it's just like, okay, empirically, you just look issue by issue and, okay, no, the public does not hold these views. Like there's just not a basis to think of, like, and you even have these right-wing populists in Europe sometimes doing well precisely as actual, like there are polls of nationalist sentiment that show it going slightly down in some places where the right-wing populists do well. And I think that also connects to our idea that like populism is not necessarily a movement out of society. It's a political entrepreneur strategy, just like technocracy and these other things.
Agreed.
But that also means you actually can't pathologize the public as like reactionary, because if you are now admitting that the things that you consider reactionary, at least, are not actually a product of, I don't know, some rising social movement in the streets, paramilitary groups, Weimar Republic stuff that blatantly isn't happening. But it's very hard to get even the left, which aligns itself with social emancipation, to trust the public, in any way. There's the dimensions where they talk about anti-politics, or the dimensions where they talk about limiting the power and privilege of politics, or things like that, almost exclusively economic. They'll talk about money in politics, which is about as easy to talk about as family values for a politician nowadays, right? Like centrist Democrats talk about money in politics. But in terms of, I don't know, and these are even limited forms, right? But referendums, term limits, these kind of things, you notice left populism is not really drawn to platforms emphasizing things that would be probably pretty popular in that respect, right?
Yeah.
Why would they? I mean, the public voted for Trump.
Exactly, that's kind of the full circle here, is because they're pathologizing the public and, oh my God, my opponent wins sometimes, it must be the evil reactionary masses. And oftentimes they have to inflate these things.
Right. And I can see that
why all these people of color are actually somehow secretly racist against themselves.
Multiracial fascism and all that.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, though, because like you see that with the Mamdani reaction, really, but you've seen this, I think, with a lot of, you had Clinton crazies in the 90s. You had Obama derangement syndrome. You even had Bush derangement syndrome. I think we talked about that.
I mean, Bush I will always say Bush was the most socially destructive president of my lifetime. But there was a kind of like Bush was going to cancel the next election type of thing. And
yeah, no, you remember
yeah,
Hillary Roof with a whole book on it. Like,
yeah. Did you know that like half of Democratic vote? I think half of Democratic voters in the mid 2000s. I forget the exact quote on this, but about half of them believed that Bush did 9/11.
9/11 truthism switched political valences in the late aughts. But yeah, it was endemic on the left. Another thing that was endemic on the left was the 2024 election. I mean, not 2024 because I'm getting old and all years are the same to me. 2004 was a stolen election. Greg Palast, journalist at the time for The Guardian, made kind of a temporary career out of that, out of promoting, basically conspiracies about diebolt machines. And that has come back. And I'm not saying that you should not be paranoid about election nearing, but like the thing is right now, you talk about an anti-political mood. Neither partisan faction in the country trusts that the elections are clean. Neither one.
And there's kind of lawfare as well. There's that now. There's this mutual cycle of lawfare. You'll have Lula and Bolsonaro on a hamster wheel, putting each other in prison. Type dynamics. But I see one of the comments said, this all seriously underestimates the incoherence and flexibility of the public. I mean, I do think if we want to talk about the public under capitalism, right? Capitalist society is market society is a war of all against all. It's a fragmented thing, right? There's not one general will of the public. That's actually how this state civil society cleavage, this antagonism between the state and civil society emerges. This conflict of the general and the particular, that kind of thing. There's a good book about that called Marxist Critique of Politics by Gary Teeple. But there are, just empirically though, there are trends of social liberalization that we can look at. And I think there were other things we could look at as well to say we're not looking at rising fascism. I tend to think that is a mass politics phenomenon. Maybe I'm getting a little off track here, though. Joe, you were talking about Clinton crazies, and I actually love that term.
Yeah, you had plenty of unhinged conspiracy theories thrown at the Clintons in the 90s. It feels like every president kind of gets... Actually, Biden didn't get derangement syndrome, really. It's not
there
because...
was not a Biden derangement syndrome. No.
Well, everybody assumed he was senile. I think that's why. But... yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's weird. I don't think the right even took him seriously enough to have derangement syndrome for him. They had derangement syndrome, but it was more generalized, like everybody in politics now. I do wonder if maybe that's just a general trend, really, that you can't read your. There has been a radicalization, I think, among the highly politically engaged, not with the public really, but among the highly politically engaged. Not really in a left-right sense, but in terms of how they relate to society and even relate to other political factions, I would say. So among that, that sort of highly engaged, you will get something like, again, these crazies or derangement syndrome, blank derangement syndrome.
I think political class radicalization is also an interesting point, right? Because we think of radicalization usually in left-right terms, but I think you can see a kind of radicalization of the center.
Yeah,
in recent years. There is the conspiracism that when I was a young wee liberal, I associated with Fox News, right? Is just as prominent on there is a universal, I would say, tendency in politics towards conspiracism now.
Yeah. I mean, like people who listen to Rachel Maddow getting really mad about Marjorie Taylor Greene kind of does amuse me. So particularly now that when people are like, what do you mean she's changing? And I'm like, well, honestly, she's riding the vibe shift, which is thermostatic. It's responding to the fact that you can't really pretend that what the GOP is representing is anything anti-political anymore. And so, you know, I mean, she sounds like a weird, like conspiratorial, but kind of center lefty populist right now. You know, but that makes sense if you are not when people talk about incoherence, I'm like, okay, but you're a product of the same society. Do you think you're coherent? Seriously. Like, you know, people comment about me. Like, how were you ever, like I've said, my values haven't changed much from when I was on the Paleocon right to now. I'm less nationalistic. That's really the difference. And like, I hate capitalists the same amount. I don't trust banking the same amount. I'm not a fan of wars the same amount. Like, I actually believe in the working class about the same amount. Like, you know, and I'm like, it's even kind of consistent. In some ways, right populist rhetoric feels more deceptive to me because I've been over there. But I also kind of feel like a lot of left populist rhetoric is pretty damn deceptive and usually self-flattering. And like, I personally, you know, think if my politics makes me feel good, I should, like, just about me, particularly me over everybody else. Not me as a part of this like vibrant social, you know, social thing trying to insert itself politically. But me as just like, I am the smart guy leading the room, and people will say, "Oh, Varn, you're always criticizing everybody." Yeah, but I'm like, I've been wrong, really wrong about some things. Like, I have miscalled some things. I have trusted the wrong groups. Like you just, if it flatters you, you have to start questioning that. And the one thing I've seen, we have seen this with people who get so frustrated that people don't do what they think is coherent that they start to hate the people they want to make part of their political subject. And if you do that, I don't know how you can convince people to trust you when they can kind of smell on you that you don't like them.
Well, I guess that's a part of the issue with a major aspect of politics. I think our departed friend, the Piping Shrike, wrote about this. A major aspect of politics is treating the world as an ideological construct, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that actually very much explains how the left operates, and in an ironic way. You would think the same people that, you know, claim to have read Marx would take him seriously on this, but Grant, what do you think?
I'm also thinking about Marjorie Taylor Greene, because we've got our whole thing with me and David talking about what her role is now and that kind of thing. That's like buzzing in my head, but that's a whole different.
Yeah, I haven't settled my opinion on that yet.
Yeah. But I definitely think, to what Derek was saying, and what you were just saying, the antisocial quality just permeates every faction of politics now. There is just a general, like, kind of a sense of public as kind of the barbarians at the gates, right? This inscrutable kind of mystery that's very dangerous. There's, you know, from the establishment, obviously they view attacks on themselves as attacks on democracy itself at this point. Now that the populist right is in power in America, they do the same thing that the Democrats were doing. You know, you had the establishment, like, we are democracy, basically, these cartel parties that were kind of falling apart. Now you know, if you have populists in power, they are democracy. We are the better democracy, and an attack on us is an attack on democracy. So, I don't know. I think that, especially if you're on the left. I mean, look, if you're on the right and you don't like people, I guess that makes sense in
Yeah, I
a
was about
way.
to say it's actually sort of weirdly ideologically consistent.
It's coherent, but what's interesting is the left simultaneously will preach like workers' emancipation, but it's always on their own term, on the left's terms, really, and it's always kind of, the left is many generals, very few soldiers, and
I think why we do this too, like why the left might be more interesting to critique as a section of politics, is that contradiction seems a lot more central.
yeah,
And
I
even
mean, it
consider,
might
like,
seem right. Like I think people can bristle at the fact that we, focus more of our criticism on the left a lot of the time, but I think that's because that contradiction, like you're saying, between their stated aims of human emancipation, at the maximal, and what you see in practice is just much more, I don't know, compelling to needle.
well, not only that, though, but I mean, it was the right didn't crack it in terms of its social base first. The left did.
Yeah.
I think there's a reason for that.
I mean, go on. That's actually an interesting thing.
Well, the decline of the labor movement, more or less,
Yeah,
right? And of course, the right social base also kind of declines, as the workers' movement declines itself. The business class is far less politically united now than it used to be. Even in the 80s, you saw signs of that as well.
And then you have these lingering parties. I mean, our era is much easier to understand when you admit that too, because you have these old Piping Shrike, who his work is unfortunately kind of hard to find, but we can try and get some PDFs out there or something. But he has this thing about like, okay, you have all these parties defined by labor business politics, right? And then that social conflict, I won't say goes away, but that social conflict is no longer defining of politics, let's say. And yet the parties that were implemented to represent that social conflict are all still there. And so what do? Right? And so, of course, now we're in an era of that, like we didn't move on, right? You'd think that the parties would then become defined by something else.
Yeah, maybe this is a way to give a broad spectrum, much larger than Mamdani or just our critiques of the left, about what we think is going on here and how you two and I came back closer together. Because I noticed the way you guys categorize these political movements roughly line up with the way I categorize the American republics. And this is kind of how I understand it. It's partly from Michael Sandel. The thing that I work on in my head that Michael Sandel doesn't is I think there's economic reasons that correspond with these republic shifts. So in the early 19th century, 18th century, you have this nascent expansionist, admittedly settler-colonial republic movement that is very localist, very diffuse. Even the Federalists, who are actually advocating for federal power, are admitting that like these go up through relatively smart communities that are basically within like one or two jumps of Dunbar's number, and people know each other and they're voting upscale in this knowledge thing, although excluding large parts of the population. I'm not denying any of that. I don't want to over romanticize it, but it was a case that the people making these decisions made these decisions with people that they knew and communities that they lived in, and pushed up, not down, to a very weak state, right? Like
kind of what Engels talked about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Then you have the consolidation of a bourgeois revolution in America. For me, it's consolidated in the Civil War. This leads to a larger state. You have the development of big capital. You have this industrialization process that had been going on in England for like 150 years at this point, but now being brought here because we're literally stealing their technology. And but it requires more political apparatus, but it's still operable and relatively coherent community models. Like, yes, it's the industrial bourgeoisie, and it's offset by the expansion westward and by more settler colonialism, blah, blah, blah. I mean, all these things factor in together. And that sets you to about the beginning of the 20th century. Then you have this need to establish and solidify this capital control, right? And this really corresponds with, and I think Lenin's not wrong about this development of kind of monopoly capital and state competition, and creates these massively strong states that can also boss these industries around. It really can boss these industries around. We can talk about how, yes, the state actually touches more people's lives today than it did in 1920, but the state had more power to tell its stakeholders what to do all over the place, because of the imperators of intercapitalist wars. Then you have the rise of the Soviet Union scaring the shit out of people. You have this kind of mass workers thing that develops. Its organic. It fails in the United States about 3 times, but it gets bigger and bigger every time. And you have this massive shift towards executive power at the end of the wars, which led to the ability to set up what we could now call an administrative state that ran on competence. Go back and read Burnham when he talks about the managerial class. He's not talking about people who have degrees. He's talking about people who have skill sets. And that hits a crisis in the 60s. And that's why the courts step in, because there's literally not really a way to hold the country together politically in the same way anymore. So you now have this administrative apparatus literally settling political problems, right? But this leads to a kind of, frankly, over dependence on the administrative apparatus for progressive liberalism on everything. And we see a shift in the state form then too, to people don't really trust this technocratic leadership by the 80s. All right. And we have people start writing in the 80s in the late 70s, even about a crisis of democracy. This corresponds with a crisis of profitability and capital. All right. Then after that, we increasingly have legitimization by crisis, similar to what we had at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, but kind of backwards. Instead of a very strong state, you have a state that's everywhere but fully controls nothing. They're invested in with all these private actors that you can't control, that have spiraling costs that they can't rule back. I mean, today, if I want to ask you, if you want to ask someone who can run a budget, are you going to ask someone who runs a Silicon Valley company or someone who runs a municipal government? Because the municipal government actually has to make the ends meet and can't go do stock buybacks and fudge valuation to get more debt to write off on their tax. It's a very different set of disciplines. But the only thing it can seem to draw anyone in is anti-political, because the only thing that people seem to justify the politics is on the crisis. Now, let's flip to what you guys said. I'm going to let you explain this, but what you started talking to me was the rise of mass politics, which comes out of crisis. We have to admit, why there's mass politics in the beginning of the 20th century, it starts emerging after fucking mass slaughters and a century of war in Europe. That's not small. Mass consolidations of states that couldn't consolidate for 200 years. But it doesn't last very long. It lasts a generation. Really, that's the era of mass politics that everyone's obsessed about is what, 20, 30 years? I guess it kind of begins, you could argue that it begins with the Bonapartist tendencies after Napoleon, but as full scale, everybody in Europe's involved. That's an early 20th century thing. Then you have these catch-all parties that don't mean anything, particularly in America, right? LaGuardia, the socialist, was a Republican. Joe Biden, as late as 2017, I saw him speak here in Utah, and he was lamenting when he would sit down with civil rights leaders, but also sit down with Strom Thurmond. This was his sadness. We didn't have these broad coalitional parties that didn't believe in anything coherently. It was just regional voter blocks. And they were sad about the ideological sorting that came after Nixon. And the thing is that one of the interesting things about the Democrats' instinct is while they are in some ways a more ideological party, they've been also the most resistant to just admitting that they're ideologically sorting. But that leads to cartel parties where you just vote party line and you don't have a choice and you're locked in, and they don't respond to you, you respond to them. And that seems to be ending now too. All right. So did I characterize your understanding pretty fairly?
You know, I've kind of wanted to go back actually on the mass political party. But I guess maybe that is a fits and starts thing. I mean, then the American political parties, I think they've always existed outside of the classic framework that we think of with mass parties, with
yeah, they're older than the European mass parties, actually. But
right, and they're kind of like they're like these. They're very porous, like semi-state institutions, really. Like they're written for electoral.
I think of one of our central texts that we recommend for understanding some of the decline of mass politics. It's about Europe. Ruling the Void is about the European Union by the Irish political scientist Peter Mayer. And I think, the United States is weird in terms of its party systems. I mean, I think you can actually take the stuff Mayer talks about and the stuff we're talking about maybe more broadly under this kind of shorthand anti-politics, which is about like party system decline, like some of these things that come out of comparative politics even, but I probably do think of mass politics as coming largely out of, like, I might put it a little earlier. I think we probably agree about the peak, perhaps, in terms of like when it's sort of fully saturated, in Europe. But I think like you're seeing the nascent formation of mass politics with, I guess, the workers' movement, in the 19th century.
Even like universal suffrage, I would argue.
Yeah. Is it fully kind of formed? No. But yeah, I would agree also with the part where you said that it's very brief, right? Mm-hmm. Like the default in capitalism is actually this this mistrust of politics and the kind of view of it as this alienated, separate sphere that we're seeing today. You have this tiny blip of mass political participation, kind of born out of these institutions in some ways that the working class and other, that the working class had sort of established in ways, or that were established to represent, quote unquote, their movements in various ways, or to represent like denominational things like Catholics and Protestants or stuff like that too. But yeah, it is very brief. You have the mass parties, and then after the world wars, you have what you mentioned, the catch-all party. That's a term from Otto Kirchheimer, who was in the Frankfurt School. He's very perceptive, right? Like if you read his old stuff, talking about like no longer do parties try and represent distinct social groups in government. Now the parties are part of government, and they go out to, and that's also part of Peter Mayer's cartel parties idea, right? There's a little bit of overlap because the catch-all party developed into the cartel party. But like, basically what I'm trying to say is like take the little jargon out of it a little bit. After World War II, you no longer have parties that seem like mass membership organizations out of society. Now they are going wherever they can to different social groups to try and get their votes. They're more appealing to a kind of general will of the public type of thing, which is, of course, an abstraction in a lot of ways. This also corresponds eventually to these more managerial ways of understanding the public, like voter demographics and, brand marketing, messaging, campaigning in that way. And then you get the party cartels, right? Which, no matter how badly or betrayed you felt by these parties, they were locked into government, and they very much mirrored each other's programs. They protected each other. They worked to keep third-party contenders out. And I think what's really feels volatile and interesting about our era is, of course, that is what's kind of falling apart about the post-war political order, and which always, American hegemony was always a more conditional, soft kind of thing in a lot of ways. But across Western democracies now, you see this kind of unraveling.
Right. And it is very inherently unstable too, really, because it's not like populist parties didn't exist pretty much around the same time that these parties morphed into cartels.
Yeah,
no,
and now
they were incorporated though more cleanly. I mean, like you think about the incorporation of the William Jennings Bryant faction into the Democrats, or the incorporation of the Goldwater faction of the conservatives into the Republicans. Whereas today, you do kind of feel like any political movement, to become a legitimate faction in one of these cartel parties, is to do this weird thing where you're both attacking it and defending it simultaneously. Where, like, I used to comment on this with the dirtbag left. I'm like, ironically, they're constantly attacking the Democrats, but they've also gotten people more wedded to the Democrats than, like, pretty much anyone before them. If you, like, listen to progressives and people in the 90s and aughts, and they want to walk away, and now they say they want to walk away, they're saying the same critiques, but, like, it's a faction within the party that's constantly moving up. Similarly, I mean, people are, like, surprised about Fuentes and this weird, actually quasi-fascist bullshit, but that's what they've been doing, is running an insurgency on the insurgents in the Republican Party, and they learned that from movement conservatism itself, which did the same thing in the 80s and set the agenda. I mean, basically all electoral politics in the 1990s was responding to that. And so it's like, we think of this as new. I mean, Obama, we think of him like the ultimate DNC child, but go back to 2008. He was not. He became that, but he didn't start that way at all. And in fact,
people forget original Obama and his appeal. I mean, you can go back and watch the Obama in 2008 was harder on Hillary Clinton than Bernie Sanders in 2016. It had a very technocratic, anti-political bend to it. This is something Joe pointed out to me and showed me some old clips, and I was kind of astonished, right? But some of Obama's original appeal, right, is hard to remember, because I think we all remember second-term Obama, who was still popular in ways and charismatic, but I think diminished from his height pretty substantially. Right.
I mean, we have to remember that like right before second term Obama is when Occupy Wall Street starts as a response to Obama, which, for a lot of leftists, I was like, that's like year one of their political consciousness. I do think it's hard to remember what 2008 was like and what he was running as, particularly in the primaries. I mean, I also remind people that Bush, who I thought of as a major insurgent candidate, was also ran as like this centrist milquetoast guy in 1999 too, and people forget that. So
the outsider,
he ran as anti-Washington, basically.
Yeah,
very few politicians don't run as anti-Washington now. I mean, I do wonder actually, like, how much of that is like what you're saying is probably a relation to. It probably does relate to the breakdown of the parties, actually. And the rise of anti-politics. I haven't. I mean, I'd have to think about the dynamics of it a bit more. It's provocative actually to ask that, but even something like the rise of Goldwater, I think that was even directly relating to something changing in society pretty fast.
Mhm.
You know,
Oh yeah.
absolutely. Like it was a sort of political class retrenchment strategy, I think, because the right had to figure out an identity, what its identity will be as the civil rights movement and the '60s in general really coming to a head. I don't think you really have that type of thing now. I guess what the political class is reacting to is it's reacting to anti-politics, but not in a very coherent way, and not in a, I think, and of course, in a more structurally deficient way, because the parties have broken down so much as well. What do you think, Grant?
Well, first off, to your theme about everybody's an outsider president now. Everybody since Carter except Bush Sr. and Joe Biden, which is interesting.
Both one-term presidents.
Both one-term presidents. And I think that's a very interesting thing to observe, right? We have an episode about Carter from back in the day as well. It's a beast. It's a little long, but what was the other thing you were asking me about though?
Me or Joe?
Joe, it was about you were talking about Goldwater, the reaction to the civil rights movement, and then
the fact that what are they responding to now though? Like, I mean, because I guess the political class, I mean, to the old establishment, really, I should say now. How do they incorporate populism? It doesn't feel like that's what's really. I mean, I guess.
Well, weirdly, they also do they kind of think of anti-politics as just populism, but like everybody's making populist appeals now, including the mainstream politicians. Like Kamala Harris was a very personalist politician in almost like a Trumpy way. Like I don't think she had as anti-political a bend as Trump, obviously. But in terms of that development of like the personalist politicians thing, 100%.
I mean, me pointing out that her slogan sounded just like Syriza, like what Mark Fisher was saying about Syriza was, which I did one at the time. And I'm like, that's weird, like just straight up weird. Because
how about
you want to talk about somebody who I think was invented by a political machine, almost in a laboratory? It's Kamala Harris. Like, but I agree with you. She was very, very personable, very, very like this weird non-partisan populism that never actually works. Like we'll get together with all these, with the Republican democracy saving complex that also set up all the levers of the state that's currently being pulled, but we're not going to mention that. Which even led to weird stuff like I pointed out recently finding a clip of Bernie thanking the Cheneys for their defense of democracy in 2024. And I'm like, well, it would have been necessary if you never did the Patriot Act in the first fucking place. But like, this kind of stuff is like ubiquitous.
It is actually interesting that I guess we did get into that in our episode, didn't we? About the left seems to have issues attacking institutions when they're in power as well. I wonder how much that relates to what we're talking about here. Actually, that ability to incorporate or not.
Can you elaborate a little bit? I think I know what you mean. The left has issues attacking institutions when it's in power.
Yeah.
When who is in
power? Actually, did I even? Yeah, never mind. Forget the last part. I was trailing off, but they have problems attacking political institutions, right? And you don't really see that on the right, but you can see. It is very strange to see Bernie Sanders, praising the Cheneys. I'll say that much. It doesn't feel very populist. It doesn't feel, and it's obviously not very anti-political.
No. I mean, watching, maybe this is a little bit, this is kind of low-hanging fruit, right? But obviously watching the Democrats, my age, right, growing up at the time I did, I just remember it was so formative, the Bush administration as this destructive thing. I mean, I remember like we're anti-war. That's what we're about, right? Like, of course. And to see too, like, these old establishments losing power, they're equating that basically to the end of democracy. and it's worse than illegal wars, and it's worse than all of these like things that have happened in the past. I mean, but I'm noticing too in the comments, there's a little bit of a conversation pivoting back to Mamdani. And maybe we can wrap up by bringing this back to where we started in some ways. Is there anything we kind of want to address about Mamdani? I saw one that was, he did start out at less than 1% though. 11 months ago, he wasn't a serious contender. Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, right? Like, no. Mamdani was, we did an episode about the Democrats and the kind of sorry state of the opposition. And we brought up Mamdani when he was out in the wilderness polling at 1% outside of Brooklyn. And I mean, not knowing much about the guy, I thought he was just going to be another left populist dud, basically. And as soon as you started hearing what he was actually saying in the primary, there was like, oh, there's some potential here, actually. But yeah, I think the unique quality of the race actually injected his campaign with a certain anti-political dimension. He also had some slick marketing. Okay, I mean, he worked with some marketing agencies that had some good brand development work and all of this too. But hey, that's really only a contradiction if you're a communist, right? But right. I think he got almost against his will. He got the anti-political superpowers from how much people freaked out about the unraveling of the establishment. He's kind of lucky with Cuomo as the foil there, kind of the perfect foil for that. But yeah, I mean, there's a question in the chat too that I think both of you are probably interested in. Is he a LaGuardia, a Dinkins, a de Blasio, or something else?
Well, I will tell you that the one comparison I've gotten the most pushback from people in the DSA when I've talked to them about this is mentioning a Dinkins. And I've been told that the DSA was basically in a whole new organization after 2015 and has no relationship to that DSA of the 80s. And I just point out the reason why the DSA is so powerful in New York is it's been a caucus effectively of the Democratic Party in New York for 2 generations, actually. I mean, like, because the DSA helped get Deacons elected in the Rabble coalition period, endorsed and everything, with 5,000 members, but they were mostly in New York. Now, will Mamdani beat Dinkins? Well, the thing is, if he does what certain people that I often agree with on the left about other things want him to do, he might, because what Dinkins got totally undermined by the police union and by the municipal bond market. So, like, he was kind of a failed project. Will he be a LaGuardia? There's no federal sugar daddy for him to be a LaGuardia. There's just not. Will he be a de Blasio? That depends on how much the YIMBY coalitions get him. If his voting record and who he's appointing is an indication, they already have a foot in the door, but there is still pushback in that field. Is he something else? I don't think we can know yet. I mean, he's not like, he's a figure that some people in the DSA told me about a year ago. And then I saw really come on the stage like 8 months ago. And now, like, they're talking about him all over the planet. So, I was even watching some weird dude in Australia, like spam my Substack because I wrote this very like measured, like, Mamdani is going to be what people can incentivize him to be, blah blah blah. But we should feel happy, that Cuomo lost. And like I got some weird Australian leaving like spam things about how Mamdani was gonna institute Sharia law. So like it was and I was like, with enemies like that, even I kind of like you. But I don't know what he's gonna be. Like I really don't know. But here's the thing: as long as it's up to just him, the incentives for him to become a normal political, like all these people usually become, are super high. And that's really all I can really say about that.
I do think the pressure is kind of forced him too, as well, especially if he's dealing with somebody like Trump.
Right.
But also, because I mean, what else can he do, really? That being said, somebody was bringing up one of the things he mentioned was anti-corruption. I mean, he did play on anti-political themes. I think, especially earlier in his campaign. I think it started to attenuate later on, though. One of the things I thought was actually quite disruptive, really, or quite like not normal politician like, was how he dealt with, say, racist attacks early on. Remember that video where he's like, some guy on Twitter told me to go back to Uganda, so I am.
Yeah, he visited. So yeah,
it was a brilliant ad, actually.
It's a good line, and I think it has that kind of raucous anti-political quality to it.
Right, and I think the reason why it's anti-political too is that it doesn't. It kind of throws the culture war away.
Yeah, it's instead of doing the culture war political response, which is how dare you,
which is what he did later on, and that's kind of a big problem,
Mamdani, he had these people telling him go back to Uganda, and he was like, I am in Uganda. I'm visiting my family. I'm coming back though. And like that is way more. Well, it's also one of the reasons I think it works too is that it avoids pathologizing the public, right? You're not inflating your opponents as representative of the dark forces controlling society, and that like everybody is. Because one of the things about Obama Obama was not an Obama was not an identity politics candidate, right?
No.
Obama was very confident that America would elect a black president. And I think that was part of his success. Mamdani being dismissive of, and the Islamophobia at the end from Cuomo, crazy. I have like the desperate AI slop of the late Cuomo campaign. We haven't talked about Sliwa. That would be kind of fun too. But the late
the GOP being a spoiler, and
but like late Mamdani, and look, I'm not trying to hate on the guy for being offended about Islamophobic remarks, but he did take much more of that conventional politician kind of outrage stooping down to their level, kind of. I don't want to say stooping down to their level, actually. That's not quite the way to put it, but like feeding it or kind of riding off of it. It's hard to explain, but I do think that the I'm going back to Uganda and then I'm coming back and I'm going to win the mayor election is a much more effective or much more anti-political approach to something like that, because, and it's not really about morals or anything like that. I'm just saying from a political strategy standpoint, it makes your opponents look ridiculous.
Yeah, it makes them look fragile and weak and petty and desperate.
Your power.
Right. And that's that was all his charm too, actually, that he was kind of this non-flappable candidate. Obama had the same thing. And the more chill you look, the more crazy your opponents look when they act like that.
Right. And that was one of Obama's flaws too, late in his administration, or kind of when he got stuck, he would become more moralistic.
Mm-hmm. No, I remember late Obama was very finger waggy. And the other thing I think a lot about when we think about what the Democratic Party learned from Obama is basically let 1,000 Lori Lightfoots bloom. Which weirdly is the wrong lesson to take, because it isn't confident. And if people want to like actually, the thing is though, I mean, we've been talking about I don't want to go on forever and bringing up Trump as an anti-political political figure is a danger of that. But the thing is, once you're in office, it is hard to maintain an anti-political figure. Why do people both demonize and love Huey Long? It's because you didn't have to deal with what he actually did. Why do people both demonize? Well, they actually didn't demonize. Why does everybody have a fucking weird myth about John F. Kennedy? Because he didn't live that long, and we don't really know what a developed Kennedy administration would have been. Like, I don't think it's a surprise that, like, if you look at QAnon and all the weird shit, but like even on the left and the right, I got the biggest probe I've ever gotten ratioed for on X. It was back when it was Twitter. Was me saying that, hey, when you pretend that JFK was somehow a secret communist and he got killed because he was gonna like end the attacks on the Cubans or something, you're structurally making the same argument as the Birchers, but with a different set of content. I got ratio and I realized, oh, people really have hope in this dude because they didn't have to watch him rule. Right. So, and you know, that's the hard reality with these anti-political figures is like, if they are left to their own devices as basically become retail politicians, of which Mamdani is an excellent one. I mean, like he is one of the, he is like, I do see him as like a Lula. He's going to be one of those out of nowhere real fire, like not even a firebrand, but like stuff will roll off him. But what will people take from it if stuff doesn't happen that they want and they can't incentivize that? That's where a lot of the rubber meets the road. And, you know, I don't know what social forces are going to do that yet. And if they are.
Right.
So
I think that's sort of where I think that ties into what we were saying before, actually, when it came to I think this conceit that you can like build a social movement out of office, and it's never worked that way historically. And I think it does get things top to bottom, or really back to front,
right,
about understanding the past.
Yeah, I also think to some of what Derek is saying, like when anti-politics, you're kind of playing with fire as a political strategy. Anti-politicians who lose their anti-political authority tend to face quite some punishment.
Yeah,
that would be the case, especially like to the extent that somebody like Macron in France, President Emmanuel Macron, was anti-political in that he started his own party and kind of broke up the old parties, at least. Very technocratic approach, but like he is also the person who, in a sense, like spawned the Yellow Vests, which also kind of gets to the distinction between anti-politicians who are often or always, depending on who you ask, political actors who are taking advantage of the particular situation that we're in, versus anti-politics in the broader sense of the society versus politics conflict that L. Marx wrote about.
Right.
And that's quite a different thing. I think it expresses itself differently. I don't think there's clear lines, right? Like, because I do think that some of what's happened with anti-politicians has been part of the kind of secular real movement of society in its own way. Maybe. But I think yeah, there is a distinction there, right? They hit these limitations within the state.
Yeah. Well, you know, I've really enjoyed this mutual conversation. For those people who want to check out the Rabble report, you can just click on it. It's in my thingy. You can go straight to their channel. There's lots of stuff. It's a different framework than I normally talk about, but it's one that I think is helpful at getting some of your head around what we're seeing right now. I even reconcile it with programmatic politics, because programmatic politics is actually an attempt to control and limit politicalness, but one that's often imposed, which is the problem with the way a lot of people try to do programs, is they just try to like cook up an ideology in their heads and then enforce on everybody, and that almost never works, or at least not without a fuck lot of violence.
Yeah, maybe we could talk about the measures of the Paris Commune as our ideas around that someday.
Yeah. But we should come back to that someday.
I know we got to wrap.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care, people. Follow. You find link to their show on YouTube and the thing. They're a newest show, but they're doing a lot of stuff. Those of you who may have listened to you, if you've heard Grant's voice before, there's a podcast that I was never really a full-fledged member of, but I did show up and talk to you about right-wing literature a lot back in the day, like 7 or 8 years ago, and that is Swampside Chats. Grant was one of the Swampside Chats people. And
I'm not Canadian.
Yeah, and he's not Canadian.
I'm sorry to disappoint the people in the comments.
Aren't you like just a New Englander? Like,
I'm actually from, they're going to hate me even more, New Jersey. Joe is the New Englander.
And I'm the Southerner. All right. And who lives out west. All right, guys. See you later.
Bye.
Later.